Okay, hi there. I'm Jonathan Warner. I am one of the MLTI 2.0 ambassadors. I'm in my second year working for the Department of Education as an ambassador for the MLTI 2.0 program, and as in my other capacity as the tech integrator at Cape Elizabeth Middle School, where I've been for about 7 years. I run the makerspace there and work with teachers and students on tech integration in that context. And we're going to talk today a little bit about digital design in general, and in specifically using digital design as set up by Keynote, because it has some features I really like. A lot of what I'm talking about you'll be able to do in slides, Google Slides as well, and certainly in the Microsoft platform. But just wanted to utilize this one because it's the one I'm most familiar with. My school is a Apple school with a mix of iPads in 2 grades and MacBooks in 2 grades. And so having that familiarity with Keynote has been really helpful to me. And I also thought that I would set it up a little bit like some of the questions, or kind of focus on some of the questions that my students will give me and that teachers have asked me to focus on as I work with them, and kind of figure out some of their areas where they need support, or areas where maybe we can rein in their energy a little bit, as you'll see. So when you're in Keynote, in the editing mode, you have this bar typically along the top, and then you also have a formatting bar, an animation, and a document, and we'll look at all those in a little bit. And you also have the choice, if you want to see on the left-hand side, your navigator, which would be like your slide deck in a column there. And then what I really like for organization is the light table, and that allows you to reorganize them in any way you'd like from this sort of macro view, which I find pretty helpful. So I hop in here and play. One of the things I'll talk a little bit about is the aesthetic approach that I take to it, to presentations like this. But I also want to say that I use Keynote for all digital design, including still images. So while you're seeing things that are animated and have various features that have to do with the presentation mode, this is also how I create still images. So as you're looking at things, maybe thinking about how you might use this as a tool for digital design. One that I'm really comfortable with and I really like, so is a place that I have focused. So raise your hand if your student has ever given you a presentation that looks like this. I have had more than a few. They make me a little bananas. And so this was part of the impetus to talk about why maybe this was not necessarily the best approach. We also have some cumulative year-end projects in 7th and 8th grade that include a public presentation, as well as a 6th grade study of the ancient world that ends with a museum that parents can come to visit. So having some sort of sense of digital design and digital presentation for those projects is really helpful. And it's also given me a way to get into classrooms with teachers who are excited to have some sort of guidance on them. So first thing I thought I'd look at is how I come up with themes and how I use the builds, that is like the animations that are a part of it. Most of these exist in both keynotes and slides and are pretty interchangeable with one another. There are a couple towards the end that are unique to Keynote that I'll point out. So one thing I don't think about is the simplicity of the design as a baseline. Not that I always end up with that, but I want to think about a lot of white space and making sure that my text really jumps out. I also try to think about how pieces go together. So in this instance, I was imagining that I was a US history teacher introducing the class for the first time and maybe giving it a kind of Declaration of Independence vibe. So I pulled that parchment from the background, for the background, from a website that has free images, then pulled in 2 fonts that I thought looked sort of Declaration of Independence-y. In general, I will try to limit myself to 2 fonts in any presentation. A lot of people will tell you that a good rule of thumb is 1 serif font which is like the AP US history in this slide, where the little pieces stick out at the tops and the bottoms, if that's not a word you're familiar with. And then having either a script font or a block font, what's called a sans serif font, a pair of any of the two of those. So a script and a serif, a script and a sans serif, sans serif and a serif. They are usually considered to be a good pairing, sort of visually distinct from one another. But once you get over about 3, typically things start to get pretty busy, and ends up. I try to think about my presentations as enhancing the subject matter and not sort of distracting from it, as that initial slide might have. This object in the middle that's between Cape Elizabeth and Congress is a shape. I'm going to show you where those come from in a little bit. But the basic premise here was to animate the Cape Elizabeth High School, then animate the AP US history, then animate the introduction, or the sort of the build-in is what Keynote calls it, of each of those other pieces. On the bottom there, I use the fireworks animation, and having something that even in the animations makes sense with that theme is kind of a goal that I have as I think about how I want to approach this. Any thoughts about that? Questions, comments about where we are? Right. Those of you who have had the experience of my steamrolling over you, I will issue my typical universal apology, and please just say, hold on, what are you talking about? And interrupt me, because I'm delighted to stop, but I also have a quality of a bulldozer at times, which is not my best. All right, so what about sort of a different take on that simplicity, colors, thinking about the shapes that you can put in to create your composite. So I'm imagining in this instance something to do with maybe computer science, or something with examining a digitally related issue, and thinking about a really simple color palette of just the green on black, more like an old CRT. And then maybe these components that come out of gaming, if I'm going to talk about gaming culture or something along those lines. And I thought I'd show you for a second where those menus are in here, because there's, we were in a session with Apple the other day, and I think he said there's over 900 shapes that you can insert. So in that slide that I was just in here, if I do shape, basic are these, but as you work your way down, you have geometry, objects, animals, etc. Down in education, you have science. And the thing that makes these really valuable to me, the session we were in also mentioned this, but I'm not sure it meant anything if you haven't seen it before. You can break the pieces apart. So if I take this thing that they've created, this splotch here, and I want, say, just the outer rim of this, if I right click on it, I get break apart. And now the elements are separate, and I can click this and get rid of it. And there are a number of times when I can do the same thing with this thing that I had put in. I can break it apart. And then if I wanted to, I could delete this. Or Command Z, I could delete this part on the bottom. Get something a little devilish looking. The other thing you can do in that same menu is right click and make it editable. And this will show you all the points that were used to create the particular geometric shape. And if I take any one of them, I can move it somewhere else to make a different shape, like so. So that can be nice too, because you can take something that exists and modify it into something that'll be more useful to you. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second.
I have a quick question.
Go for it.
If I'm pulling up an object and the break apart is not an available option, is there a specific reason for that, like a specific type of shape where that might be the case?
I have never encountered that before, and then I did this morning preparing for this. So this game controller, right click, I cannot break it apart. I don't know why. I can clearly see what the elements are. So I just have no concept, and I wish I could tell you. I can make it editable, meaning I can move all this stuff and, I don't know, whatever that would be, make it something else. But for the purposes of this particular shape and several others, I don't know why. I've been stumped by my friend the Keynote. So another kind of technique I like to use is matching up the animations with the subject matter. So this is an animation called Keyboard, and it just lets you automatically, as you can see, I'm not doing anything right now, have it set to automatically move through these. And then I just pulled in a GIF of Space Invaders to kind of go along with that. And you can time these in any way you want. So I'll show you what the timings are for this in a minute. But especially if you're giving a presentation publicly, it can be really nice to have your slides move along on their own. This is great also if you're doing a Pachachka or some kind of, or Pachakucha, pre-programmed length of slides. It can be very helpful, but something like this where I might want several animations to go at once, I can do that as well. So the menu is not always entirely clear. And one of the things I learned quickly is that the menus change completely depending on what you're clicked on. So if I'm looking at this and I'm clicked on this text, I have the option for style, text, arrange, and then various options in there. If I click on the slide itself over here, now I get a completely different series of menus. And I just never really paid attention to the fact that that was the case. And then I can also change the menus based on what's up here. So if I'm clicked on a slide, the animation menu has to do with the transitions between slides. But if I'm clicked on text, the animation menu has to do with build in, action, and build out. So just to pay attention on the right-hand side there, that things are kind of popping in and out based on what you're kind of investigating, what you're manipulating in the slide. And it was something that did not occur to me, or I didn't notice for quite a while before I got going. To get that media in there, I inserted it as a movie. So I turned the GIF into a movie and I brought the movie in. And you can also record separate audio. So you can pre-include like a description or something. If you imagine doing, this is what my students do for their museum project, is they actually pre-record the slideshow and they play it and then they answer questions. And then 5 minutes later, they play it again for a new audience and they answer questions. So it's kind of a cool way to try it out and see how it's sounding, but you can also use that recording for other purposes. Any questions about what we just saw there?
So the movie with the retro game coming down, that entire thing was embedded, like the GIF that was embedded as a movie file?
And you remind me of something that is, you would think I would remember since I'm looking at it, but I didn't. The movie is right here in the background. So this thing in front of it is just a big box. And I do this constantly, right? So there's this green, now green, but it was black box in front of it. And then I will remove it and then start an animation, or and this works particularly well in Google Slides. If you have a presentation where you want the slide to stay the same, but the pictures to change, I will typically layer from the bottom up the last one I want to have show, then I'll put a box on top of that, a picture, a box, a picture, and then I remove the layers instead of adding them in. And it makes, for things like dissolve feature or the dissolve sort of transition, it looks, as my father would say, pretty slick. So it's right back there as a movie, but you're not seeing it in the still slide because that black box is in front of it. And then over here, if you look at the animation is to build out. And I'm going to show you in the next slide. This build order thing on the bottom is incredibly helpful and really easy to navigate. once you're trying to do a little more complex animation. Okay. So images and fonts. You may notice that I have a bunch of fonts in here that don't look particularly Apple oriented. That's right. They come from dafont.com that I'll show you in just a second. I also use a lot of transparent images. And if you haven't done a search for transparent images, I was just going to show you where that is as well. So if you imagine for a second, I'm presenting to like a engineering class or CAD class or something. Maybe I'm going to use this graph paper kind of architecture-y looking concept. And then this is where the animations, I think, can be really cool and kind of engaging. So I'm using a feature that draws them in as you go. So the build-in is a trace, it's called, and it's making it look like I'm drawing it on the page as I go. And it can be a really nice way for something that's supposed to look like a drawing to emerge. It does not work for images, this particular animation. So if you notice, when I did the animation for the two houses coming in there, they can't draw in because Keynote only will allow you to do that to something that's native to Keynote. So the box is native, the text is native, that line is native. The gears are an image from inside Keynote. So it can manipulate those by drawing them, but something as complicated as these drawings, if you're importing the image, you can't use this particular animation called trace. So if you're finding that you click on something and it doesn't let you select the animation, it's because there's some kind of inconsistency between the thing you're trying to animate and that capacity to animate it. So let's look for a second at my email. Dafont.com. D-A-F. I have no idea where this name came from. This does not work on iPads, but it works on Macs. And what you're looking for are the OTF or TTF fonts, files. And those are just the extension for a font file. So let's say I'm going to look for a tech-related font up here. And I like Megatech. So I'm going to download over here. I'm going to open up the zip file that downloaded. And then each of these are versions of the font in various kind of configurations. And unless you load that one, it won't have it as a choice. So I'm just going to load the plain one. There's no difference that I have found between OTF and TTF files in terms of their functionality within Keynote. So if I take that one, maybe I'll take bold and I open them, I get this little installation menu. And my biggest issue with this is that I forget the name of the font when I install it. So I'm going to say it out loud, Megatech, 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 Megatech. And then I go back in the Keynote. And now I could choose over here as one of my fonts, Megatech. So I bring in all kinds of fonts for various things. I did a presentation with kids that I made look like Stranger Things. So I found out what the Stranger Things font is and I put that in. I've done them with Fortnite. There's a Fortnite font out there, Star Wars. Like it can be a really fun way, make it more interesting for you and definitely more interesting for students to engage them with a kind of visual that represents something they're familiar with and kind of offers that added interest in making the slides engaging. It also seems to help direct that energy to like randomly put in emojis and make things pop back and forth. If you can give them kind of a target of, all right, well, what's your subject matter? What's a good theme or sort of cultural icon that's consistent with that? And then how might we replicate that? And then in terms of getting those images of the houses, if I go back into Chrome, and if I search for, let's say like house plans. Go into images. And if you haven't used this menu tools, it's super helpful. So I almost always choose for a large image, meaning denser and less likely to be pixelated when you blow it up big. Then you can also choose type, but for some reason the color menu is where transparent is. And so what's appearing now on the bottom are things that if I put them on top of my graph paper, so here's the one I found. If I take this and right click and copy the image, and I move back over to Keynote, you can see that you can still see the graph paper through it because the image is a PNG file type, which is transparent. So that's a nice trick to get something that, especially if you're going to start layering things, which I'll show you in a second, that can be a really good way to have something pop out and look, kind of stand out against your background, but also have some subtlety to it. And in this case, of course, if you're imagining this being the plans, it works nicely with the graph paper in the background. Anything about any of those? So that was dafont.com, DAFONT. And there's a bunch of those out there. I just happen to like Dafont. It's very searchable. And
could you go through the trace effect again? I've been trying to just play around with that and it hasn't been working the way that I assumed it would. So I'm just curious what step I'm missing.
So if I take this text and I animate, my build-in is trace, as opposed to say lens flare, which looks like that. Trace should take an element that started as a Keynote element and be able to draw it into place. But it won't work for something that wasn't originally a Keynote object. I think you can't even choose it, or if you can, it doesn't do anything. And when the gears spun, there is a second phase besides build-in. So in the animation menu, I have build-in, which is line draw for an object like that. Same thing as trace is just called line draw for an object. And then the action I made subsequent. So the build order here will tell me all of my animations in order. And I can change whether or not they happen on a click or after the previous one or with the previous one. And I can just drag them up and down to change the order, which I find super helpful. Sometimes I do get a little lost in the animation menu, but that's my fault, not Keynote's. Okay, so layering, I use a ton of layers, and I just thought I'd show you a couple simple examples. So in this instance, you have the background of the football field, then that kind of gray box is laid on top of it, and then a text box on top of that. And what I've done with the kind of gray bar there is make it semi-transparent. So I was going to show you the color menu in Keynote is incredibly, it's very straightforward if you want to use it in a simple way, but it has a lot of functionality as you get more comfortable with it. So if I choose that box, I remember I have to choose the thing I actually want to, if I choose the text, I'm going to get a different series of menus than what I'm looking for. So I choose the box, I choose format, and then this would be if there was text inside that box that was connected to it. It can get a little confusing. So this is a text box by itself. This is a shape that has the capacity to put text in it. I usually just ignore that and I make it two different objects. What I'm looking for is the style menu. And there's these defaults here like red, color fill, or gradient fill, which will give you two different colors that you can go from one to the other. But the thing that I find super helpful is if I click on this little wheel, I get the more in-depth color menu, and there's the crayon option, so I can just change it around any way I want. But there's also the dropper, so I can match it to something. So let's say I wanted it to exactly match this background there. If I wanted it to kind of stand out a little bit, click the dropper, click gray there. If I wanted it to exactly match the MLTI color scheme, I could do it there. And then there's also all these other ways to interact with the color. So you can do it on a, I don't know what this is called, color dial, color wheel. You can do it with sliders, and there are several different ones, like HSB stands for hue, saturation, and brightness. So I can make it more blue, or I can make it darker, or I can work my way through the various colors of the rainbow like that and come up with exactly the shade that I want. So for me, that's been a really helpful way to kind of think about the layers. Then once I've done it, I can make it as transparent or opaque as I want it to. The pronunciation of opacity is a frequent conversation topic with middle schoolers, opacity, among others. And here I also have a layer. This gear, our symbol, is actually on top of a semi-transparent circle. Because if it's on a background that's a little darker, it's very difficult to see. So I frequently will put it in there with a semi-transparent circle behind it to make it pop out a little more. Okay. Now for the reason that I began to learn about Keynote. This is not possible in slides. If you're using slides right now, I'm sorry. Magic Move. Magic Move allows you to take elements that are anywhere on the screen and bring them in animated from one place to another. So what you just watched was a regular animation of the text dropping in. It's called anvil. So it falls in from the top. And then that kind of bright light that's shown across the bottom is a second animation. But then to get myself to move in, I'll show you what I did, but I used Magic Move, whose purpose is take object A in slide 1, and wherever you put object A in slide 2, I will move it there as I transition between the two slides. So Magic Move refers to the idea that the single object that exists identically in two slides can be moved from point A to point B during the process of the transition. And the other day we were looking at one that's similar to one I'll show you in just a minute, where it allows you to take multiple elements and move them together. And it can create some really cool effects that look like animation without actually requiring any of the kind of legwork of animation. So if I zoom out here a little bit, you'll see that I'm actually on the screen here, but not visible. So this kind of brighter section is the part of the slide that you can see. And then I magic move or slide myself in the process of animating the slide. So here comes anvil, anvil, then I can't think of the name of that one, and then magic move that I'm coming in like that. So here's where it gets, I think, really helpful. So this character of mine is currently off screen to the far left, and you can't see it, as is a football. And I'm going to bring myself into the screen, or my Bitmoji into the screen, by magic moving it as I transition from what looks like an identical slide. So I have the same slide copied. In slide 1, I'm off the screen, and in slide 2, I'm on the screen. And so the result is this. So I'll show you what's happening in the background. So in this slide, I'm off to the left. in the next slide, I'm on screen, and then I'm off to the right. And I split apart my Bitmoji into two pieces. So I took, this is preview, I took the football and I made it one image, and I took myself and I made myself another image. And then to get the effect of the ball coming faster than I was running, when I split them apart, if you notice, the ball is way back over here and I'm right next to the screen, but we're going to both travel to this point here. So when we get on the screen, it has appeared that the ball came faster to me because it came a greater distance in the same amount of time. So in that setting on the right-hand side, here's the slide before. My animation is a magic move that lasts 4 seconds. And during those 4 seconds, I run effectively from here to here. At the same time, my ball goes from here all the way over there. So when you play it, it gives the illusion that the ball is arriving faster than I do. And then I move the two objects together off the screen for the next slide, making it look like once I've caught the ball, as I always do, I've scored a touchdown. So that one just takes some playing. And the part that's really irritating is if you don't make it an identical object, it will disappear instead of sliding. You find yourself like, where did it go? And it's because you just need to go back and copy and paste the object again. So in this instance, I started with it here, I copied it, I pasted it and moved it there, copied it, pasted it, and moved it there. And that allows the program to track that it's the same object moving 3 times. And it can be with anything. Your background can do that. I had one image that was comprised of a bunch of different Twitter handle pictures, and I had them all slide in from all the different directions. So in the prior slide, I had them scattered all over around the outside of the rim, and then I used Magic Move and pulled them to the center in rapid succession in different amounts of time. And so they came in kind of like snow falling, I guess, to create the image that was on the screen. So you can have multiple things move at the same time. So I thought I'd show you just a couple other animations and stills that I've created from simpler to more complicated using Keynote as the platform, and then take any questions you have or go back and look at anything. So this first one is, my wife works for a psychology practice that has an office in Rockport and an office in Yarmouth. So the convention for psychologists is coming up and they put an advertisement in the program. So her boss asked me to design the advertisement. So you're looking at one text block on the left-hand side, that's the types of work that they do. A second text block on the right-hand side, which is the descriptions of that work. Then a text box with the doctor's names. The icon from the company, which I imported from the web. And then the white box with a thick border around it. To take that same idea a little further, at the end of presentations, Kate and I will frequently do a postcard series where we encourage the audience to take pictures of like highlights of the presentation and then text them or email them to people that might have further conversations about it. So we just did one on Actima about digital citizenship. And so the theme was like, we can help you navigate this, we can help you figure this out from the point of view of a map. So I took in the background a topographical map of kind of a central area in Maine, Windermere it looks like. Then I took that image of the famous sign of all the different towns. I put that slightly at an angle on top. I put the semi-transparent box, which is that rounded edged rectangle, then an old stamp I found, then a PNG transparent cancellation stamp on top of that. That compass rose is a transparent image using a Google search, and then just a text box, actually 2 text boxes to create the you can get here, and then you just need the right map. And then that's with an imported font from defont.com. At Actum also, Emma Banks, who is one of our team members, was presenting about computer science, and she was looking for an analogy to describe the big rollout of computer science work. So I was trying to explain, not very well verbally, what I meant by this. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe I'll just create a version of it in Keynote for her to see. So you're looking at 3 magic moves with icons on top of it, text boxes, and then the keyboard built-in, like I used in the computer science one, to make it look like I'm typing. So I'll go through that one again. So that river is a shape that exists in Keynote. Text box with an icon, a new text box with a new icon, and then copy and paste the ferry and the kayak into the next slide and use magic move to get them to slide. That bridge is actually above the prior slide, and I have it drop down in using magic move. So you can get really as complicated as you want, but in this instance, you're actually just looking at the bridge, which is a Keynote shape, the 2 icons, which were from a like water theme pack, and then the text box on top of the river shape, which is also a Keynote shape. And then we have our sort of 3 areas of focus. And I didn't like the way that our still image was coming across in presentations. And I ended up talking about it for much longer than I wanted to. So I decided to make myself like a timed visual here that allows me to talk about each of these concepts for about 10 seconds. And it kind of like a Pachachka forces me to go forward. So this is the one I've been using when I present to kind of keep me going, keep me moving along. And you're looking at 3 gears, which are Keynote shapes that are then animated using the motion feature. You're seeing the layer of that semi-transparent round cornered box on top of it, and then using the build-in of dissolve to make each of those subcategories appear. And if I come out of that mode, you can see that's a box, that's a box, that's a box, this is a shape, this is a box, that's text box on top of it. So you're just looking at layer upon layer. This triangle here is a shape to create that kind of fan effect. And if you look at the number of animations I have, it's a bunch, right? But working together in either succession or simultaneously, it gets me that effect. Back here in the one about the bridge, all I had was the keyboard built-in animation and the dissolve for the kayak, then adding in this text box. The reason there's no animation attached to this ferry is because if you notice in this slide, oh, sorry, I just have it dissolve between the 2. The sub feature of Magic Move is you can have fade unmatched objects. So if I turn that off, the ferry will actually pop in instead of fading in. Sorry, started on the wrong slide. So in the previous version, I had it fade in. This time, it's just going to appear. And that has to do with whether you have this chosen. And the shape of the river is actually not, it doesn't look like that. It looks like this. And so I did right click, break apart, and then I just deleted all these little whatever those are, doohickeys, to the left and right of the river. So anything you want me to go back to, take a look at from an earlier slide, look at some different menus?
I would love if you would go back to, you had talked about like starting from the bottom layer up and how like that was something that is relatively interchangeable between, you know, slides and Keynote. But I'm also just curious because like obviously your skill level is, you know, way beyond mine, but it's kind of like where are kind of those beginning stages, and that feels like a really clean way to have like a nice solid like starting skill to learn.
Yeah. So I'll do it in a really simple version to show you what I'm referring to, and then we can complicate it any way you want. So I'm just going to add a blank slide down here on the bottom. Get rid of this menu and zoom in a little bit. And let's say I want to do a, actually I'll do basic shape. If I were to do this quote box, that, and then I'm going to copy it and paste it again, change the color using format, copy and paste it again, change the color using format, copy and paste it again, change the color using format. So let's say I'm having like, oh, actually, this is a good thing to show. If I take that one and the pink one, I can use the arrange menu, which has a whole other series of great options that we can come back to at a later date, but you can flip things left to right. So let's say I was having a conversation take place during my presentation back and forth between groups of people or several people, right? I could have these delete as my animation, have them go away, but I think it makes more sense to build them in. So I'm going to choose the blue one first and say, animate, build in, add an effect, and let's say dissolve. And then it shows you a little preview of that. Then I'm going to do the pink one, add an effect, and any feature, any animation you've just used pops up to the top of the menu, which makes it easy to find again. So I'll dissolve that one, yellow, add an effect, dissolve, green, add an effect, dissolve. And now in build order, I can either choose for them to be on click each time down here, or I can have them do them in succession. So I'm going to start with my having to click to make the first one come in. It can happen right after the transition. But then after that, I'll say I want it to come in after build one, delaying half a second. After build two, half a second. After build three, half a second. And now when I hit play, it's going to be blank at first because I set the first one to be that I need to click to get it going. And I'm clicking once and I get the blue. I'm not doing anything, pink, yellow, green. To imagine that sort of a different way, I can copy the whole slide. And I do this a lot when I'm kind of messing with something and I don't want to mess up what I've already tried out. So I'm going to just do right click again. And there's wonderful, really helpful menus in Keynote. When you right click, I'm going to duplicate that slide. And now I'll edit the second one instead so that I can keep that first one intact. I'm going to flip these two back to the same direction as the first ones. And then I'm going to stick them all right on top of each other. I don't know if you can see that little yellow guideline is telling me for sure if I'm on top. And now if I do my animation in the reverse order, so I'm going to get rid of all these, delete, 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 whoops. Delete, delete, delete. I'm deleting the animation. And if I add in the effect of building out instead of building in, I'm going to have them dissolve. And I can do that for all of them by selecting the whole group of shapes. So my build out is going to be dissolve for all of them. And then I'm going to do that same thing where I'm going to have this one go immediately after. That. And now when I hit play, it's going to give the appearance that it's changing color. But what's actually happening is each of those quote bubbles is dissolving as it builds out of the slide. So that's when I use all the time, because I really like the way that it kind of allows me to manipulate these really easily. And then I can just pop them back on top of each other. So if you imagine, I want an image of two kids talking to dissolve into an image of two kids texting to dissolve into an image of two kids walking away from each other. I'll put the walking away image first, then I'll layer on top of it the texting image, layer on top of that the talking image, and then build out each of those photos so that it gives the appearance that they're dissolving one into another. But actually what's happening is the one on top is slowly disappearing and revealing the one underneath. One other really helpful menu, if you select all these objects and I go to Format, Arrange, I showed you down here this flip one, but this positioning one is phenomenal. So I can say I want these all to be the exact same size. Let's say 400 by 300. And now they're all identical because I have them all selected. And then if I want to layer them on top of each other, I can say 500, 500, and they all have the exact same coordinates. So those are just XY coordinates on the grid. And it allows me to come up with all the different shapes that I want to put in, but then get them lined up perfectly by saying I want them all to have the same position.
Thank you. Jonathan, when I right click, I don't get the break apart, that feature.
So it depends on what it is, Yuhang. In this instance, I know why it doesn't exist. It's because it's a single object that doesn't break apart. That gaming control, I don't understand because I'm pretty sure it's multiple objects, but any of their more complicated shapes like this crown. Let's see if this is more than one. No, it's not. Let me find one that has space in it. Shape. There we go. So the mitten is comprised of two shapes.
I see.
One is the rectangle, and then one is this mitten shape. And if I right click that and I make it editable, I can see all the little points that are used.
Oh yeah,
Created.
I see what you mean. So it is one object you cannot break apart, right?
It's the shapes that have that are comprised of multiple from their menu up here. So rubber ducky, although complicated, I'm guessing is a single shape. It is, yeah. But I can make it editable.
Okay. Okay.
Give him some genetic challenges.
Okay. So you have to do several times, right?
Yeah, I find that I have to, in that instance, yeah, I'm going to have to manipulate the various pieces to get them to do what I want them to do. And I do a ridiculous amount of trial and error in Keynote. Command Z is my best friend.
I see. Thank you. That's very helpful.
I will say there's also a capacity that can be pretty cool to collaborate here. So you can share and then collaborate with other people in a Keynote. If you
where is that?
So if I'm on the regular screen here and I slide up to the very top, my menu for share, allows me
Okay.
to. And then Keynote Live, theoretically, fantastic, meaning it would operate exactly like Google Slides, where you'd be able to have this multi-person participation. I have in a school context to have it work. I think it's because the demand on the Wi-Fi is really high, and these files are huge. That they can get into the gigabytes, like they're just enormous. If you have, say, 20 slides with 20 films in them, they really become very unwieldy. And when you then are trying to internet share them to collaborate, you just get stopped up. So I will tell students that in general, I prefer that they're working on a single device and collaborating or sending the project back and forth and adding slides that way. Or if it's a fully collaborative one, I'll say, all right, let's do this in Google Slides. It makes more sense, which sort of goes to that eternal question of matching the tool to the task. If you're trying to do like a really cool, complicated animation, maybe Keynote's a better choice. But for any kind of collaboration, I'm going to say to students, you know what, it's probably better to give up some of those fancier features like the ability to import fonts. I also have blown many minds by showing them that you're not limited in Google to the fonts that you think you have. So when you're in any Google document, whether it's slides or whatever else, if I go into slides and I create a new one, and I do this text box, people think that they're limited to what's here, but the More Fonts menu has hundreds of Google fonts to choose from. So my students that are bummed out that I'm telling them they can't import fonts, I'm usually able to assuage them by saying, hey, don't worry, we have all of these choices in here. So in slides, I mentioned that some of those movement features. Here's the transition menu. That's between slides. And then if I pick an object like this one, my animation menu is this one, add animation, but you'll see that I only have these choices. So when we did the student conference, I had all my students working in Google Slides and limiting the number of, while that limited the number of animations available to them, you can combine them. You can have something simultaneously fade in and fly in from the bottom. So I had an astronaut seem to appear dissolving as he flew in by having the same object have two animations simultaneously. So that's how Google gets around. That's how Google can be used to create some of the more complicated ones. So if I do fade in at the same time as I do, let's say, fly in from the bottom, and I make these happen at the same time. So here I'm going to say with the previous animation. When I hit play, well, that wasn't particularly successful, was it? Maybe if I slow this down, let's try that. There we go. So it's fading in as it slides in. And that's how I've been able to get some more sort of interesting animations going. So my astronaut in my slideshow did this, where as he slid into the screen, he was also slowly appearing.
Great.
And that same rule of like, make sure you notice what you're clicked on applies for Google Slides. So if I'm clicked on this, I get to add the animation. But if I'm clicked on the slide overall, I no longer have that ability until I select an object to animate. So pretty much everything we just did, and actually we can do a different session on doing what I just did in Google Slides. But if you look at, for example, the shape menu, it doesn't necessarily have as many things, but it does have a bunch of them. And I can do all that same stuff about animating the individual pieces. You can also move the layers. So I can say, I want to send this one forward or backward and make it so that the photo that I have in the second position, I can move forward to the first position or back to the back. So those kinds of options are all available in slides as well. Ooh, that's not where I wanted to go.
Cool.
Oh, thank you all for
Thank-
joining me.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your coming. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would it be possible, Jonathan, to share